Hello, we're gonna get started in a few minutes.
Sounds good.
We're gonna start at 7:05, everyone. Give some other people some time to join.
Sounds good.
A few more minutes. We'll be getting started in two minutes, folks. All right, it is 7:05, so I think we can get started. So welcome everyone to tonight's webinar, Cybersecurity, the Compliance Story. Tonight we have Pritesh with us. He has 10 years of experience in compliance And this is sure to be a very educational presentation. Before we get started, I just want to give a quick 2-minute overview of CSNP for anyone who hasn't heard about our organization before. And are you able to see my screen? Pritesh, are you able to see?
Yes, I'm able to see it.
Awesome, thank you. All right, so CSNP stands for Cybersecurity Nonprofit with a mission on promoting cybersecurity education and awareness. And as part of our mission, like I was saying, we're dedicated to promoting cybersecurity awareness and education and improving diversity, equity, and inclusion in security. And our goal is to make security knowledge and training accessible so everyone can learn how to protect themselves and their organizations from cyber threats. And the way we facilitate this learning is through career development and workshop opportunities and webinars like the free event that you're attending tonight. The types of events that we host presentations, we host workshops, hackathons, panel discussions, and we host networking events. In fact, we have an in-person networking event happening in San Francisco tomorrow. Other programs that we have our blogs, our career resources page, our cyber safety pages, and also a free boot camp in the making. And we have chapters all over the country. So if you're interested in joining a CSNP chapter, feel free to find us on Meetup and join a chapter there so you can start getting involved. Other ways that you can get involved, we're always looking for volunteers. So bootcamp instructors, people to submit blogs, speakers for presentations like the one tonight, any cybersecurity professionals who want to lead events such as technical workshops and hackathons, chapter leaders, and other leaders to help run the organization in areas like marketing, communications, program directors, and sales. And this is all made possible by our sponsors and partners and all of the individual donations that we get from our CSNP members. So thank you to everyone who has contributed to that. And yeah, thank you. Here's our contact information and our social media information if you would like to get in contact with CSNP and learn more about us. So now I will hand it over to Pritesh. If you have any questions, please be sure to put it in the Q&A box. That way it doesn't get lost in the chat. All right, Pritesh, over to you.
All right. Thank you, April. Thank you for that introduction. And I'm really honored. Let me switch this. All right. Hope you all can see my screen.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Again, thank you for pulling this together, and I'm really honored to be here. I've been following CSNP for a few years now, and I've attended multiple events. And one of the things which I thought was helpful or will be helpful is talking about the compliance side of the cybersecurity world. So that's why the topic comes cybersecurity, the compliance story. We are going to focus on critical infrastructure protection and the compliance world around it. I don't know if people have heard about that or have even stumbled upon it or any kind of article, but today is all about educating you all about the critical infrastructure protection and what are the compliance standards and how it is laid out. All right, so let's get this started. To start with, let's look at the agenda. The agenda for today, I'm going to introduce myself, talk about my experience, who I am, and what kind of journey I've been on in this space. Then I want to talk about how connected we are, in this world right now. Then what is critical infrastructure? Let's understand that. Then we'll take a deep dive into FERC and NERC, understand what are these bodies and how NIST security risk controls have an influence on these standards. Then I also want to make sure that we understand why we care about NERC standards, or why should we care about NERC standards. Then we'll look at the NERC reliability standards. And at the end, I want to make sure we look at the cybersecurity framework, which we have seen organizations in this space, have successfully built it or are building towards it. And just want to make sure, we all understand how it maps to the compliance standards we'll cover. All right. And like April said, towards the end, we'll have a Q&A session. So keep your questions intact on your note and we will answer them towards the end. All right. To start with, who am I? My name is Pritesh Bhoite. I am currently the manager of NERC implementation services at IP Key Cyber Partners, where we are implementing the Sigma Flow platform. I have more than 10 years experience working in this critical infrastructure protection industry, especially working with electrical utilities. I have a master's in IATM and a certified PMP. I've helped multiple customers, small to large utilities, through their NERC CIP or NERC reliability standard process implementation, predominantly using our Sigma Flow application. That's the primary application we have been implementing. And this journey has been interesting as the standards really started, like the standards were mandated and were enforceable starting 2007. So it's very recent. So the industry is still understanding how to adapt and how to implement. So it has been an interesting journey. I've been learning with our customers as new standards come, the changes come to it. So I've been loving it, the problem solving part of it. And it has been a great experience, a lot of learning for sure, and a lot of implementing these detailed processes for which we really don't think about it. When we turn on the light in our bedroom or in our rooms, the electricity just shows up out there, but what goes behind the scene to bring it to your room is the part of the world which I have been living since I graduated, to be honest. So yeah, let's look at it closely. There are a few more interesting points about me, but I want to take a deep dive into this tech. So let's get this started. Cyber connected world. We all are living in this world where everything is connected now, right? We have so many devices, we have smartphones, computers, and it has gone beyond that. We have refrigerators, thermostats. We have smallest, like watch, right? They are all connected now. It is capturing data. It has my personal information now. By 2027, we are looking at up to 40 billion devices connecting. And this covers different sectors: automotive, smart cities, critical infrastructure. We are going to focus on critical infrastructure. And I do want to mention an incident and why it is important to think about the cyber connected world, or the different devices we're using and how they have, what kind of impact they have on our life. In 2018, in one of the casinos, I don't want to put the name out there, but they had a thermostat in a fish tank. Hackers were able to get through that thermostat, create a gateway into their network, and they were able to download the high roller database and upload it to the cloud. So even one single device left vulnerable can create a havoc, basically, right? So that's how connected we are. And I want to make sure, we focus on critical infrastructure. And one of the critical infrastructure events which recently happened last year, Colonial Pipeline. I'm sure you have heard about this. This is one of the most impactful attack on a critical infrastructure in America. There was a data theft which happened on May 6th, 2021. Colonial Pipeline is a company which provides gas to 45% of the East Coast, gas, diesel, and jet fuel suppliers. So there are around 11,000 substations which were left stranded because of this attack. This ransomware attack, they robbed the data. They asked Colonial to give $5 million. Then they will give or delete that data. CISA, that is Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, helped them recover $2.3 million. Okay. On 9th May, emergency was declared by President Joe Biden when the gas pipeline, was not able to work the normal operations they're supposed to. With some research, investigation, and some troubleshooting, they were able to get the pipeline online. But there was still a lot of gas stations which were, left stranded. Department of Justice was involved. There was a congressional hearing. And as a result of this, in March 2022, that is this year, there was a law which was created, which requires critical infrastructure entities or companies or organizations which have a major impact on the livelihood of millions like us to report incidents like this to CISA, so that CISA can create awareness in the community and make sure no one else goes through it. This is what, led to that law. So critical infrastructure, right? There, I do want to make sure you also, I want to highlight this important statistic where Microsoft put out a report out there. This is from last year. America is, we all know, America's most targeted country, 46%, out of which 48% is government. So it makes it more important, right? So let's understand what is critical infrastructure. I'm going to read the definition. Critical infrastructures are defined as physical and cyber-based systems so vital that their incapacity or destruction would have a debilitating impact on national defense, economic security, or public safety. And what are the sectors it covers? It covers these sectors. If you go around the circle, you'll see you are part of this ecosystem in some or the other way. You are leveraging or using these different services, right? So one day without energy, we went through it in Texas, the winter storm of February 2021. It created massive impact, and millions, I don't want to say millions, but at least thousands were there without electricity. And there was a lot of impact, economic impact in the Texas area. So critical infrastructure is important for our livelihood, for the integrity of society, right? I can't talk enough about it, to be honest. So why critical infrastructure is important? We understand that now. And what is critical infrastructure? What is supporting that or making sure it keeps on running, right? The engine keeps on running. So FERC and NERC, Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, and North American Electric Reliability Corporation are the two bodies which are helping maintain the electric grid and the ecosystem. Majority of all the different electricity providers which are there around you are mostly distributors. NERC only covers the main, and I'll cover this in a few slides. It only covers generators and transmitters of this electricity, right? It all starts from the Department of Energy. I'm looking at the pyramid. Then we have FERC. Then we have NERC, which is also an ERO, Electricity Reliability Organization, okay? Then we have regional entities. We'll go deeper into what these regional entities are, but NERC or ERO is an independent organization which reports to FERC. And these regional entities at the bottom report to NERC and comply with the standards published by NERC. There are lots of standards. We'll look at it closely, okay? All right. NERC origin story. Why NERC exists, or when it started. It started way back in 1965. There was a blackout then, and that led to creating of NERC, or National Electric Regional Council. As a result, They were able to create regulatory bodies, other entities that created an ecosystem so that they can support the grid. But after the 2003 Northeast blackout, where millions of people lost electricity for a few days, it created a massive urgency, an urgency in the government to create something which will allow them to regulate the electric grid. And that's what led to Energy Policy Act. Through Energy Policy Act, Congress wanted NERC to be that body which will mandate and create a community for people who can contribute to the standards and be compliant to it, right? FERC was going to regulate NERC, but NERC will be the body who will be mandating the standards. And 2007 was the year when it happened. It became mandatory to and enforceable. And since then, regional entities have been working with their registered entities who are reporting to these regional entities, and these regional entities help these registered entities. There are more than 1,500 registered entities which are supporting our electric grid. These regional entities work with these registered entities to make sure they're compliant. They have their own audits, which they go through. Plus, they help them understand how to be compliant with these standards. They help with the interpretation and they make sure they are compliant. There are 6 regional bodies, regional entities over here. NERC is not only an organization which is managing or maintaining these standards, but it also has the authority to fine when you are not compliant. So in 2019, NERC fined Duke Energy, one of a large utility, $10 million for cybersecurity failings. And that's just an example. Okay. So regional bodies, regional entities work with registered entities to help, to make sure they're compliant. But NERC is also providing certain, platforms for these utilities to help them with any kind of incidents or identify or work through their cyber and physical risks. And that is EISAC, Electricity Information Sharing and Analysis Center. This was created in 1999, as it showed in the slide, but this body was created so that they can help the community and build that knowledge and be the helping hand when there are incidents where they can be better at responding to it or recovering from it, right? They also created GridX, which is the largest grid security exercise in North America. Every 2 years, EISAC hosts this event where different entities are invited, different regional entities and the registered entities over there are invited to go through a simulation where they will create an incident and practice how to respond and recover, right? So that will help with their plans too. Also, they have GridSecCon, which is a conference where they all can meet. There's different leaders from different registered entities can meet, share their knowledge, and also share the information about how they are trying to be compliant with certain standards. This is a great resource for all these utilities to share the knowledge and create that awareness in the electricity industry in North America. Now, as we go through these different things, I do want to make sure we also understand an important piece which has recently which has been like a critical player or has been contributing, has an influence on NERC CIP standards, and those are NIST Cybersecurity Risk and Controls Framework. I'm pretty sure you have heard about it. Cybersecurity space talks a lot about NIST standards. And over here, we are looking at the cybersecurity framework, which NIST published. And it's pretty straightforward, very logical, but the effort behind all these different columns over here is a lot, right? So especially for electrical utilities where they want to make sure they are always protected, they are very sensitive about their data. So a lot of effort goes into identifying their assets. Then they have to create a plan. How do they protect these assets, right? If there are incidents, Do they have a mechanism to identify these or detect these incidents? Incidents will happen, things happen. So do they have a plan, or what is their plan to respond to these events? Also, how do you improve from this point onwards? Or how do you recover? What are the plans implemented? What are the protocols implemented to recover the normal operations? That's what this framework covers. And this has direct influence on NERC CIP standards, and we'll look at it in a few slides. But NERC has been very closely working using these NIST standards to build their, develop and build their requirements and standards. Okay, let's take a deep dive into NERC standards. But before that, this was an interesting slide. Why should we care about NERC standards? I walked you through the, what is critical infrastructure, what is NERC, what is FERC, and how NERC got the power to be the ERO, Electricity Reliability Organization, right? These NERC standards which are published are not just for being compliant for a year or so. It is a culture which is now getting introduced in these companies, these organizations, these registered entities, which will allow them to protect themselves or avoid any kind of major mishaps, cybersecurity mishaps, by creating that ecosystem of compliance, that culture of compliance. So like it says in the slide, it's not just a standard, it's a habit the organization develops and creates awareness in the company between for their employees and the contractors, so that they can be compliant. And one of my colleagues gave a nice analogy about how compliance is directly related to weight loss. If a doctor tells you that, hey, you have diabetes, you have to lose weight. So the weight loss journey cannot be just 1 month long. You might lose weight in a month by doing some rigorous diet, exercise. After a month, when you go to the doctor for a checkup, you'll feel better, get positive results. But that doesn't mean you can sustain with the same old diet which you had before you started on this weight loss journey. You have to make healthy choices. You have to create a system, a process in your day-to-day life so that you can sustain or you can maintain that weight which you have lost, right? It's exactly the same for compliance. You can create these protocols, you can create these different procedures, but if you don't follow it, or just follow it for a month or for a year, after that, if you don't follow it, you're not going to be compliant. You're leaving some loopholes, which can create a problem. So compliance is a sustainable, compliance is all about sustainability and continuously improving your cybersecurity program so that you stay protected. Okay. Now let's get into what is NERC standard applicable to. Here I have a picture of bulk electric system, very high level. Everything beyond this these green lines, substation, step down transformer, this area is basically distribution. Mostly it is less than 100 kV. This does not fall under NERC compliance. Everything before that, that is the generation part and the transmission, is applicable to NERC standards. And the organizations or entities which are in this space have to comply with NERC standards. Now, what are these NERC standards, right? These are all the reliability standards published by NERC, maintained by NERC, but we are going to focus on CIP. There are more than thousands of requirements under these different standards, but we are going to focus on critical infrastructure protection that directly is related to cybersecurity. And what are these different cybersecurity or CIP, critical infrastructure standards? There are 13 of them, out of which we are going to focus on 4. The 4 which we are going to focus on are CIP4, they're highlighted in green over here, CIP4, CIP7, CIP10, and CIP13. These are the most controversial standards, and entities are, are always playing catch up with these standards. They have a lot going on. These standards have a lot going on. And let's take a look at it closely to make sure we understand what are these different standards applicable for and how it ties into cybersecurity. All right. So let's get started with the first one. CIP 004-6, personnel and training. This statement, which I have on the screen, it is directly from the standard published by NERC. Okay. So this standard specifically talks about access in your environment and how to manage access. When the auditors knock on your door and ask about evidences for CIP4, it can get really complicated depending on the request, right? But utilities have set up workflows, processes, procedures so that they can create evidences during different processes or during different steps of access management. Access management covers, access revocation, access termination, access provision. Every time that happens, there is an evidence created, and that's what is reported to the auditors. But before giving access, there's a process which it needs to go through, that the individual needs to go through, or that utility goes through to make sure that person is eligible, right? So there's a background check. The personal risk assessment program covers that. They do a thorough check, a background check for that individual who they are going to provide access to, right? And then they make sure they go through certain cybersecurity training and awareness, certain cybersecurity awareness training, which will make sure they're aware of how to conduct in their organization, and they educate them about how to react when you see something, or for example, what is a sensitive data, right? What can be categorized as a sensitive data? Those things are covered under those training programs. And this is one of the most complicated standards to implement with respect to process. And it has been fun interacting with customers when we talked about this. And keep in mind, this directly ties into identity access management, which you might have heard in the cybersecurity world, right? This is directly tying to that the applications like, applications who support IAM feed into these standards for creating evidences. Okay. So again, if you have one malicious actor, you know what can happen. That's why the PRA, personal risk assessment program, is very critical. The background check is very critical. Okay. I'm going to move on to the next standard. This is another complicated or one of the controversial ones, system security management. And one of the most difficult part over here is the patch management part, because what happens is when IT in those organizations, in electrical utilities, when you get a machine, when you are joining a new employee, when you get a machine, they use an image, most of us do, right, to create to install the software or the operating system on that device. That device has certain number of softwares on it, right, based on what kind of access that new individual has. These softwares are coming from a certain vendor. Microsoft is the most common one, right? They release patches every Tuesday. These patches are applicable to different applications owned by Microsoft. How to identify which patches are applicable to your organization and taking action on them, there's a deadline for that. You have to identify the patches or evaluate those sources to identify or to pull out those patches which are applicable to you. within 35 days after that patch is published. After that, there's another clock which starts, which is to apply that patch or install that patch in your organization for applicable cyber assets, or you mitigate the application of it. That means you're not installing that patch in 35 days. You are creating a plan where you will address all patches like this in 6 months, right? So that's a mitigation plan. That itself is a complicated process, because if you think about it, there are hundreds of softwares that will be used in an organization for different teams, an entity, an electrical company, a utility have different teams, departments. So there are hundreds of softwares. So they have to be vigilant and alert about what are the patches, what is applicable, and apply that on time. Along with that, this standard also covers malicious code prevention. What plan do you have for that? What ecosystem do you have for that? Or what procedures do you have for that? All these different things contribute to system security management, that is CIP 7. Then there's CIP 10, which is all about configuration change management. When there's a change which you are implementing, there's a brand new software, there's a brand new patch which you're applying on these assets, it has to be documented. This is another beast which they try to tame, and it is a task. There are requirements in this standard which talk about vulnerability assessment and what are your plans for that, what are your procedures, what are your tasks which are performing, how often are you performing those, are you addressing all the different types of assets which are there in your environment or in your ecosystem. That's another requirement in this under this standard. Baseline management. When I applied that image on that new device, it had certain softwares. That is my baseline for that type of device. How are you managing that baseline? That is a complicated process in itself. So CIP 10 in general is covering a lot of bases and a lot of complicated areas for an IT organization to continue supporting any kind of changes which are coming into the organization, right? Next one we have is supply chain risk management. There's the last one I'm going to talk about, which has recently got a lot of attention in the NERC CIP world because of the recent solar winds attack. I'm pretty sure you've heard about it. There was a massive attack on the product which was released. I think the releases were 2019 and 2020. And they directly inserted a malicious code during the development process, as a result of which it exposed a lot of customer. It directly went to the customer's environment, whoever upgraded first of all, and now they were able to access that data. So a lot of government entities and critical organizations were impacted. SolarWinds is a very high profile application used by a lot of different companies. So it had a major impact, and it's a vendor product. So supply chain of vendors and what kind of risk the company will have by engaging with that vendor, they need to identify that as part of this standard and create a mechanism to avoid those risks or have a plan for it, right? This is going to grow further as vendors, are getting a lot of attention, and they're going to a lot of scrutiny by electrical utilities to make sure electrical utilities don't get into any kind of a problem because of their vendors they're working with, right? So this is going to grow eventually. This is the first version we are looking at right now for supply chain. The standard existed before, but it was not really complied. It was not one of the important one. There was basic information, but after SolarWinds attack, the importance has gone up. All right. These are all the standards which I wanted to cover. I have covered most of the things about NERC CIP. We understand NERC now. We understand FERC. We understand the different reliability standards they have. and how these NERC CIP standards directly play into the cybersecurity framework, right? And that's what I want to end this slide deck with. I want to walk you all through the cybersecurity framework. And I believe for no matter what organization it is, electric utility or any organization, for them to bring a change in their organization or create an ecosystem for cybersecurity, they need these three pillars: people, process, technology. Let's understand what is people, right? People means educating and empowering your employees with right kind of training so that you can avoid any kind of cyber attacks or any kind of social engineering tactics, which we have seen. Just FYI, World Economic Forum last year published this number where they found 95% of attacks happen through human error and are introduced through social engineering tactics. So it's very important that you keep your employees educated and make sure you, not only employees, but also contractors, educated and trained about the different kind of ways attackers can attack, right? Next is process, having that kind of ecosystem, having that kind of protocols implemented in your organization so that you can proactively prevent certain cybersecurity incidents. Those processes are important. And then to support all of that, you need tools, you need softwares which can help detect, mitigate, and also respond and recover from these cyber incidents or cyber events, right? Now, all these three pillars directly feed into the core of the cybersecurity framework. It is at the foundation of the cybersecurity framework. What are the aspects covered by the cybersecurity framework on which the organizations should be focusing on, and how they tie into compliance, ownership, and accountability? This is one of the aspects where it is important to create a resilient cybersecurity framework. You need ownership from your employees, representation from your organization, so that you can create clear accountability for certain tasks in the organization. For example, you are supposed to just focus on all the applications which are related to compliance, all the applications related to cybersecurity. And what is your protocol over there? What is your department doing to keep up with the patches which are released, right? So if you have correct ownership, you have defined ownership, they can take a deep dive into that piece and create the system where they can be compliant to standards. And NERC standards help with that. They will give you specific requirements. Hey, these are the different requirements which will help you to be compliant for system security management, CIP 7, right? Next is process and locations. This is more about recovery. Once an incident happens, what is your plan to continue business as usual? And are there any crisis related protocols or any kind of mechanism which you have implemented to recover from it? What are you doing for that? That's what this covers. Next aspect which I want to talk about is business and IT change. Organizations always go through changes. There can be, just organizational structures change, access change. That's what I look at. That's how I look at it. Access change, or there is the introduction of a new application, new device. In a resilient cybersecurity framework, you will analyze, identify the impacts different departments have because of this change which will be introduced, and accordingly prep for it. This is the aspect which covers that part where are you informing, are you communicating internally to make sure you have a resilient process for any kind of change in the organization. Technology and data. I mean, that's one of the important things which we need to protect. I hope, or from the stories which I've shared before, it explains how important it is to make sure the service of these technologies continue and are not disrupted. And if they get disrupted, you have a way to roll back from the situation and effectively recover from it, right? So there are some plans and procedures organizations implement for just dedicatedly working on technology and data and creating a recovery plan for the same. The next aspect is information security. Data, again, it comes back to data. But what kind of security you have, what kind of layers have you created to make sure the right person has access to the right kind of information in the organization? There are documents which talk about it. There are protocols which you have to go through to make sure you are eligible to get that kind of exercise, that kind of access, right? And this is all to avoid any kind of unnecessary access or unnecessary exposure of data, sensitive data. The next aspect is third-party suppliers. This we just talked about it, CIP 13, right? And how important that is. Last but not the least, the foundation, again, people. We have to always make sure for an organization to have a resilient cybersecurity framework, we have to always make sure there are people who have the right skills and the knowledge to maintain this cybersecurity framework, right? People move from one organization to another. It is the leadership's responsibility to make sure they're always resilient when it comes to cybersecurity framework. I hope this brings it all together, compliance in cybersecurity world with these risks and controls in the cybersecurity framework. That's all I had for you all. I am now open for any kind of questions you all have. April, should I stop sharing or how do you want to go about it? You're on mute.
Oh, of course I'm on mute. Totally up to you, Pritesh. Everyone, if you have any questions for Pritesh about compliance, about critical infrastructure, about NERC, please feel free to add it to the Q&A or even in the chat. I'm sure he would love to answer any questions anyone has.
Should I stop sharing?
Yeah, you can stop sharing if you want.
Yeah, done.
Okay, we got one question from Alex. They want to know, do you work with attorneys or the legal departments?
So we don't directly work with legal department or attorneys. As I'm part of IPK Cyber Partners, I'm more on the vendor side, and we have a product which we are implementing for these utilities. So utilities, they have their own legal department and attorneys, which they work with. Most of the time, the people in their cybersecurity department are very senior folks in this space, and they are aware of how to implement some of these standards and requirements. But larger entities who have a major impact have attorneys and legal department to interpret some of these standards and requirements. So we work with cybersecurity teams or compliance teams or regulatory teams to implement those interpretations of standards. So we really don't directly work with the attorneys or legal department, but we are one who are on the other side. Okay, we have another question. We are only talking about NERC CIP tonight. What about NIST CIS? So yeah, this was today's webinar was all about NERC CIP, critical infrastructure protection, which is which falls under NERC. NIST, CIS, FedRAMP are different. There are different kind of standards which are applicable over there. Yeah, we're not covering that today. This was purely about NERC CIP standards.
Do you have any other questions for Pritesh?
There are a few.
We got one question from Alicia. I'm
Yeah.
new to cybersecurity, and this was extremely informative for me. And their question is, how soon can a newbie get into compliance?
That's a very good question. And honestly, I've spent 10 years, and that's now I've gathered the courage to talk about it. But you can start, there are local chapters or local, I'm saying local chapters, but there are entities, utilities which have jobs as analyst jobs, which you can get into if you have some knowledge about these standards. To start with, there's so much content online. The NERC has their own website where they have published so much content. You can read through these standards. It's pretty straightforward if you understand the terminologies, but it should give you a good foundation to at least interview for these analyst positions. For a newbie, Alicia, you can start over there and start interviewing. There are also a lot of consulting companies who are working closely with these electrical utilities to implement these standards and make sure they're adhering to these compliance standards. So that's another gateway into this world, which can be helpful. Or maybe one of these days we'll have a job opening which you can apply at SigmaFlow. All right, the next one is, oh yeah, Thomas Kirkpatrick. I hope I answered your question about the job opportunities out there for NERC. Utilities, again, utilities, consulting companies. There are also a lot of trainings out there. Even if you understand NIST, you can go for the interviews. I'm pretty sure you'll crack it. Okay, there's a question from Mo. Hi everyone, thank you for the presentation. Is it true FERC does an audit but does not report its finding unless it's serious malice offense? I don't know, I can't pronounce the last word, but they do report it. There's a whole page where it says civil penalties, and it will explicitly tell you who these entities are and what are the reasons. They do not audit. They are not responsible for auditing. NERC is. NERC has assigned auditors who go and audit these utilities every 3 to 5 years, and it can, I've heard about rumors of it being an annual cycle too for some entities, but I don't know about at what level those audits will be. But FERC doesn't really do any kind of audits. It's mostly NERC who's running these audits for registered entities. All right. We have, thank you for that link, Michael. Sumer Jagtap, is there a specific cert for NERC compliance? There's not. I mean, it's more, like I said, it's still new. It's not established, that well established. They are still developing these changes, but there are trainings which are out there which you can go through to educate yourself about these NERC standards and how to be compliant. There are a lot of companies out there who can provide you that training.
All right, do we have any other questions? Okay, if not, I think that pretty much wraps it up. Thank you so much, Pritesh, for this presentation. I had a great time learning more about critical infrastructure. Thank you for everyone who attended. After this webinar ends, there should be a survey that comes to you. Feel free to fill it out and give us any feedback, or if you have any other topics you would like to hear from CSNP speakers in the future, please do let us know.
All right. Thank you, April. And thank you everyone for joining. Y'all have a great night.
Thanks everyone. Good night.
Good night.